Glory, she graduated in 2020 from the master's program at Syracuse University, television, radio, film,
Mm,
and we did not have a graduation, but we had a
yeah.
lovely goodbye in our last day of animation that we thought was only going to be 2 weeks, and then it happened to be, forever. So,
Hmm.
um, yeah. And so when she was in school, she started a podcast, and then she just put out a season two. And so she's here today to tell you about the podcast, and then how she created it and how she sustains it, and hopefully get you guys to participate in her upcoming season that she's planning for.
Yes.
Welcome, Glory.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen really quickly. Oh, but yeah, how do I top that, Shayna? I don't know. So my name is Glory. Started my podcast in 2020 during grad school, during COVID. Let me see, but can you guys see my screen? Perfect. Okay, so started my podcast during grad school during COVID. And initially, actually, before it started a little before COVID, like it started like January, February of 2020. And it came about because I was a TA for a podcasting professor. His name is Seth Everett. I don't know if you guys have his class or if it's still available, but really cool teacher. And I was just working alongside the students, just helping them out. And then he was like, "Would you like to pitch your podcast?" And so I was like, "Sure," because initially my portfolio to get into Newhouse was like one of the things in it was about podcasting. And so I was like, oh, I would love to kind of, that would be something that would be cool, but I never thought it would actually happen. So once I pitched it, my first episode was the N word, which was obviously that's so controversial. And the initial name for the podcast was Egg because yeah, very, very catchy. And then I realized, obviously, like probably want to make it more diverse or general so that it can everyone would want to listen to it. And so I ended up changing it to Squeamish. Um, and yeah, that's how it kind of started. So I'm just gonna run through like what I'm gonna talk about today, and then I'm gonna get into like the rest of the content. So we're just gonna do the intro, little Squeamish backstory, teaser video, and then we're going to go through the process of what I would do in terms of creating podcasts or like what I do in my process and to create a season lineup and just episodes and things like that. Um, and then go into distribution because I'm under a podcast network called Underdog Podcast. So it's like a whole process. And then why podcasting? And then we're going to do a little activity. So fun activity that Shayna mentioned earlier, just kind of like creating our own podcast episode, if you will, and then Q&A. So, and I'll go through like the pros and cons of podcasting and just like any other questions you guys may have about podcasting. So get into this. So about me, yeah, so I was a pre-law student. So I actually initially did not plan on going to film school. I always liked writing and creative things, but like it wasn't encouraged in my household. It was like a sure as a hobby, like if you want to do film or any of those things, but like it wasn't like pushed for. And so I just ended up doing pre-law and Chinese language, and economics. And then after over time I started to like volunteer in like really fun projects like on my free time. And so instead of going to like college parties, I would go to like I would be a volunteer for events. Like I would do the event producer for like homecoming and like spring fest or whatever. And then eventually I realized like, oh, like I really like creative things. And so I took a gap year and I was looking to go to law school, and then eventually it was just like this is not for me. And so I took a leap of faith and I applied to Newhouse. I had 1 month to apply, and I just submitted what I had in my portfolio. And it just kind of went like the rest was history. Like it just worked out for me that way. And so in my portfolio, as I mentioned, like I had like a podcast pitch I think it was called Egg Woke, actually, when you think about it. And it was just like uh just fun things that college students might want to talk about, like how, like which classes to take, or like, like which uh what is your favorite, like what's the best major, like dating on college campuses, like different questions, like social questions that people would ask. And I had that cool idea of like, what if we had this? But then I kind of wanted to take it a step further with Squeamish and be like, okay, how about we do something a bit more like general that my dad can listen to, and like people my age can listen to, and people a little younger can listen to and get some advice, or just like understand what's going on in life, and all that stuff. So going through the process of like what I like and what I like to listen to, I've noticed that I listen to like more like unconventional or like thought-provoking kind of content that's like surrounded by like media or like social justice, politics, you name it. So I just started to think like, what name kind of is niche? Like what topics are niche? What content is niche, especially in a saturated like world, like podcasting and film and television. Everyone has a podcast now. Like, how do you stand out? And so Squeamish kind of came about because it was like, oh, it's the name itself is like, oh, I'm uncomfortable, but it's also like that's the point of the show. Um, and so yeah, Squeamish is meant to like tell like stories, and to have like conversations that you probably wouldn't have if you were just like at work, but like you kind of want to have with your coworker. Like, did you see what happened in the news? But like now it's like group discussion. So the format of the show is we have a panel of like 5 people that come together, and I like ask them questions based on like specific topics. So we had an episode where we talked about like no one wants to work these days. And it's usually from sound bites. So like I heard Kim Kardashian was like, oh, I feel like am I looking at the camera? Or am I looking down? No.
Good. You can look wherever you want.
Okay, I'm just gonna look here. Does that make sense? Okay. So sorry. So I basically, like, we had an episode called No One Wants to Work These Days, and it was kind of just a conversation about like, hey, like Kim Kardashian said this thing about no one wants to work these days, but like she's also like a really rich person, and allegedly has been known to exploit her workers or whatever for like bad living conditions. And so I'll see something that's like a quick soundbite, and then I'll dig a little deeper and then get to a point of like, this could be an episode because it kind of touches on so many different people, like people from different walks of life. Everyone has had a boss or has been in a situation when they're like, I don't really want to go to work. Like, this is like, no, I don't want to do this job, or I hate this job, or I want to quit this job or whatever. So it's like, that's how I kind of pull my inspiration. And that's kind of the genesis of like Squeamish, where it's like, it's supposed to be it's supposed to start a conversation. So anyway, I think I'm rambling. I'm gonna play the teaser video so you guys can get a feel of what the show is about, and then we'll go into like the other parts of the thing. So this is my promotional for Squeamish. Give me 1 second. Let me know if you guys can hear this.
Welcome to Squeamish, the podcast that awakens your social sensibilities. Each episode, I have stimulating and organic roundtable conversations with guests about social commentary issues.
Now our internal conflicts are like world discussions.
The media is merely a blip of reality.
Should I have to break out of my shell to tell somebody that's wrong when they should just know
I don't want friends for just this season. I want them forever.
We have it both ways, being Black and queer.
Things are not always as they appear.
Like, where is the aftercare? Where is the
I don't know if the beauty industry really cares about the visibility of the invisible.
Womanism can sometimes get lost in feminism.
Talking about religion, a lot of people have problems with this. One of the things I have to say that I love about your podcast, and I love that it's Squeamish.
So yeah. So that is my teaser video for the podcast. And I just want to say really quickly, it's so important to like invest in your podcast, like those types of things, like teaser videos or just like promotionals, because I'm not gonna lie, this now explaining to you guys all that I've been doing for this podcast, it was kind of tough, but like having a video that just back it up of like, hey, like this is what the podcast is about. We have this many guests, which is like I've had like about 40 guests on my show in the span of two seasons, in the span of 4 years. Obviously, like I do like the episodes I do are like very long-winded, sometimes like 2 to 3 hours, depending on the conversation, and then editing it down and are like recorded ahead of time and then released like a year later. So it's a process, but to have a promotional like that, it really does help to like market your content, especially if you might have a hard time like speaking about what you do, but then it's like, oh yeah, that's what I do. So yeah, vulnerable, uncomfortable, thought-provoking conversations with a roundtable of guest speakers from different walks of life, different creeds, different backgrounds. That is what Squeamish is about. And it's just meant to, like, as I said, start a conversation and like lift the veil of like everyone, like, because the thing is we kind of all have similar opinions, or like it's kind of like Jubilee, what they do. It's like we're sitting in a room and we're having to sit down with ourselves and talk about things. So that is what Squeamish is about. So I'm just going to go into the process of how to create a podcast. So when I create, sorry, just so you guys know, I'm still at work. So if you hear anybody, it's because those are my coworkers. So sorry for the noise. So when I'm creating a podcast, or when I'm creating a season lineup, what I'm looking at is first development, right? So we're looking at ideas, we're looking at pitching, we're looking at research, planning, the season lineup, casting, booking guest speakers, the script and interview questions, and the intro and outro. So for me, for Squeamish, the first thing that came to mind, as I mentioned earlier, is like, if you're starting out with the podcast, you should always think about what about my podcast stands out, especially in this day and age where podcasting is so saturated. What kind of niche conversation am I going to bring to the table? There's been so many dating podcasts. There's so many podcasts where they're reading like the funniest tweets, or like tweets from like that are like rate this person or whatever is going on, or just even like true crime podcasts. Like there's so many podcasts out there. So you have to think, what about my podcast stands out and really just like captivates people? Then you have to think, okay, this is, if you decide, hey, I want, for example, Squeamish, I decided I wanted to do something that's uncomfortable, thought-provoking. It kind of gives like a news journalistic vibe to it. Now I have to think of ideas, right? So ideas that match my podcast would be things that have to do with politics, that things that have to do with social culture, pop culture, things that have to do with like things like what affects everyday lives. Like, for example, like every human being may have a moment where they're like, sorry for the trigger warning, they might have like eating disorder, or they might have like triggers of like body shaming or things like that. So think about like, what about my show is different, and what ideas match the show that I'm looking for, and kind of push my show a little bit forward so that people want to click on my show. Then for me, because I'm under a network, because you still have to do this to yourself too, but for me, I have to pitch my episodes to my I guess you could call him my boss, like my distributor, and say, hey, these are the episodes I would like to do. This is what I'm looking to create for this season and for this show. Is this okay? And so for me, because I'm under a network, I would have to think about, how am I representing the network as well? Working for an entertainment corporation, like certain things like that, you have to think about, okay, hey, like, how am I representing this corporation? What content am I creating? Is this a conflict of interest? Like things like that. And so when I create shows, I definitely still want to push the veil, but I'm also mindful of like certain sensitive topics, especially for a show like Squeamish, where we are touching on very sensitive topics. I've been told multiple times, like, your show is very controversial, you might not want to put that on your portfolio, things like that, but still this is art, so you still want to make your art, but you just want to be mindful of like, how would that resonate to listeners, because you still want them to click, but also how would that resonate to my distributor, and like, can this be aired, can this push through? So once I pitch it, I basically get the green light, yes, you're good to go. I've actually, everything I've pitched, even like discussions about, abortion and things like that have been greenlit because my boss is kind of more open-minded of like we need to have these conversations, whether it's like for or against, like we need to have these conversations. So it's been helpful. But even then I'm like, oh, I don't know if I want to have that just yet, because you have to be mindful of like the moral compass when it comes to creating. I think as a creator, you have a moral compass that you have to think about. So so after I pitch, I go into research, right? So digging deeper of like, okay, I want to do an episode about no one wants to work these days. What are the statistics about who wants to work versus who doesn't want to work? What am I seeing on the web? Like a lot of the times where I'm doing research, I'm looking at video essays, I'm looking at, commentary on social media. I'm talking to family members, I'm talking to coworkers who are comfortable enough to talk about that. And seeing like, okay, I'm taking in information like these people feel this, but these people feel that. And especially when you're a podcast like host, you kind of have to be, regardless of what show you're doing, if you're like Call Her Daddy or Joe Rogan, you still have to be very like neutral when it comes to like, you need to like allow the people who are listening to your show and the people who you're interviewing to not think that you're judging them. Even if you don't agree, you kind of want to like give the vibe of like, you know what, that's like, it's for the art. Like we're not going to judge the art. So we let them say what they have to say, obviously within reason. So that's what I usually do with research. Like I'm digging deeper, I'm finding out more information about, hey, like this person feels this way, this blog site says this. Obviously fact check your information, make sure that what you're researching is credible, coming from credible sources. For me, like New York Times, Washington Post, obviously like the big leagues, and then like just like making sure it's not just like the Shade Room reposted, even though Shade Room is kind of getting better. But anyway, so like just think about those types of things. And then after research, now you have to plan your season lineup. So for season lineup, I'm thinking, okay, hey, this season we have these number of episodes. Let's say I have 10 episodes. I want to have a very diverse, unique of a varying episodes like each season, right? So this particular season 2, I've had like we had the No One Wants to Work These Days. I had Surviving America, talking about what it's like to be an American, especially with gun violence and gun control and all this stuff. Excuse me. Talking about like Don't Say Gay, talking about dating as a Gen Z, because you're like statistically people are noticing that Gen Z and millennials are not really, they're not basically the relationship type these days. Like it's hard for them to get into a relationship. It's hard looking at like watching these things. You're like, I want it to reflect the culture and the change in the culture. So I always try to be mindful of like my season lineup. And if you're not if your show is not like a topic-based show, it's more like a guest-based show of like, hey, I want this particular guest, or like, hey, I want this particular topic within, like maybe every season is like the same topic but different guests fill into different parts of that specific topics, then make sure it's like changing with the trends, like spotting what people are liking, what people are not liking, but still pushing the status quo. So casting, when it goes to casting, I will say this, and I'm going off of my experience. When I'm casting, I'm thinking, okay, I want to have people, for my show, it's everyday people, which helps a lot, because before I used to try to find like the biggest, like not the biggest guest, but like the guest that's like director of this organization, or like this person's like a social media influencer with 500,000, followers. And so like season 1, I had like, people who were like, they had like 250,000 followers and like things like that. But like, for me, I feel like it can take away from the fun of what you're creating. So you don't have to have the most influential person. You should just find someone who has something to say and has something like, and what they're saying is different or interesting, or the same thing, but it's unique to them and it really makes a statement. And so whenever I'm casting, I don't want someone who's just gonna like, one thing I wish I could have done differently is like not cast people who are kind of like they're agreeing, yes, man, they're agreeing with everyone else on the panel, and they're not really contributing so much, like they're afraid to say something. Because like if you're gonna make a podcast, you have something to say. So you want to make sure that whoever you're casting is like, oh, I'm comfortable speaking. And they know what they're talking about too. And even if, and depending on what you're talking about, like let's say we're talking about the election or whatever, there might be people who feel like they know everything, but they actually don't. It's good to have them talk still, because then they can, through dialogue and communication with other like guest speakers, like they might realize like, oh, I actually don't know what I'm talking about, or oh, I know more than I thought I knew, or whatever. Because the point of the show is to basically, for me, for my show, at the end of the show, I want people to feel like they learned something about someone, or they feel like I didn't realize that this person, I thought this about this, but now I realize otherwise. So so casting is very important, like being mindful of like who you're casting, why you're casting this person, where do they fit in, like if you cast like a wide net for like multiple people to be on your show, like for me, I'll cast like 30 people, I'll get all the names, and then I would kind of like disperse them to like episodes I feel like they can speak better to. Which goes into book guests. So yeah, I would say just be mindful about who you're casting. And then script and interview questions. So when you're creating interview questions, you're going to think, hey, like, okay, I'm creating, like, what kind of questions do I want to ask? I don't want to ask the same question in a different like wording. Each question has to move the needle. Each question has to challenge, and also you may have a list of questions that you write out, and like sometimes I'll type out questions and I'll send it to the guest speakers, not sometimes, all the time. And we're like, they'll prep for these questions, but then the conversation will take itself any way, which way. And as the host, as the person leading the discussion, it's kind of your job to like realize like where it's getting, like where the conversation's getting not heated, but like where people are more like passionate about, and kind of like poke in there a little bit, obviously within reason, but don't, sometimes you have to plan on the whim, like, oh, this seems like a lot of guest speakers are really resonating with this specific point that this person made like 2 minutes ago. Let me in the moment start thinking of a question that could really help push the direction of this conversation, because this could actually really help this particular topic. So like when you're asking the questions, like really like pay attention, like actively, of like what's happening in the conversation right now, where do I want the conversation to go, especially if you're towards the end of the session and you're kind of trying to wrap up. Then you're like, okay, I think right now I should have a wrap up question, so I'm going to start thinking about how to like make sure I'm still answering or asking all the questions I wanted to ask within this episode, but like we're wrapping it up, you know? So that's kind of where that comes into. And then intro, outro, for me, when I did my intro and outro, what was the best thing for me was I produced my intro and outro in a studio before the pandemic officially hit. And so I was able to record a bunch of content, like a really, really good sound mixing. I was able to use like the audio arts kids, like really get their help, and like my professors to like help me have a strong, solid intro, outro. And then that kind of like, I just basically each season it's the same intro outro, but then a little bit of mixing and changing for like the for like what the episode topic is on. So I'll put like, you know, this, and today we're going to talk about blah blah blah, so that people know it's a new episode, but the same intro outro, because the best thing for you to do, especially as a new podcaster and just in general, is to put your best foot forward. You want to make sure that the content, the intro and outro is strong, so that they recognize you as someone who's like a very like credible like guest, if that, not guest, sorry, credible, creative, credible, professional, clean cut. They know that your content is going to be like clean, like if that makes sense.
You said you had an economics degree. I'm wondering how that has helped you with doing research and talking about politics, and if you feel like being kind of literate in economics has allowed you to like express things that are kind of gate kept to a lot of people, or do you feel like you don't really need to be economically literate to kind of understand what's going on?
Yeah, so I was an economics minor, but I would say this, like I love economics because it's like the writing of math and like all of that. If I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like it's more like qualitative, like very it's like a psychology of math. And so yes, it did help in terms of like spotting why people buy groceries. Like there was, we would have sessions where like classes where it's like, why does this person buy these groceries, if I remember properly? And like understanding the macro level of things, like how it affects a society and economy, and then like the micro levels. But I wouldn't say that my economics degree really helped me. I think what really helped me would be like maybe even the pre-law background, like just because I always, what I noticed, especially as a linguistics person and like a pre-law person, and just I loved history, is we would always have to write papers. Like in every Chinese language class that I would like, because I studied Chinese language and culture, we would always have to write, like learn about communism. And so I studied abroad twice in high school and college. To like, I went to China and I was able to immerse myself in the culture, and that kind of helped me in terms of being more open-minded and learning about Tiananmen massacre, like all these different like historical moments in China, and then also learning about like I would take like what's it called, U.S. Constitution. That's one of the classes I had to take for pre-law, and like learning about like sitting in and having discussions about the Supreme Court and like, you know, what that means, and if that's, you know, if that whole process works or whatever. So having those types of like classes that were very big on um not debate, but like very big on like writing and very big on like articulating your thoughts and paying attention to the world and writing about it. Um, it really did help me to like expand my idea of like being more open-minded and like seeing people and understanding different cultures outside of America, because like America is like 4% of the world in comparison to other places, give or take, whatever. And so that kind of helped me to get to where I needed to be in terms of how I got to this point, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. Economics, I think it all adds. I think that what I've learned is wherever you go in life, like whatever major you're doing, it all kind of helps you. Like, for example, I work as an executive assistant. I'm having to deal with like the CEO of the company to like the, you know, the supervisor to the intern. Like you're dealing with so many different people with different opinions, and you're hearing people who are like the, you know, not lower the totem pole, but like their opinions on the suits versus the people who are the performers, like, you know. So you get a feel of everyone's opinion, and you have to kind of have empathy for every side while still remaining neutral. And I think because of my current role, it's helped me to kind of do that, especially in podcasting. So yeah, I hope that was helpful. I don't know if that.
Yeah, it seems
Yeah.
like having like holistic kind of knowledge has helped you more than just like a
Yeah.
field or something like that.
Yeah, I think it definitely broadened my horizon. I'm so sorry. Give me 1 second, guys. It's not loud for you, but it's loud for me. Give me 1 second.
This is distracting for sure. Hayden, what does that translate to? There's Chinese in the chat. Is that?
He also learned Chinese.
8 years of professional Mandarin education that I haven't been able to use in too long. But yeah, I agree. I mimic the sentiments. Very good for understanding cultural contexts across the board, and knowing how to speak about those things in a manner that is both inclusive and conversation starting.
I don't know what happened, but it sounds very exciting what you guys are talking
I
about.
commented on there's a Chinese in the chat, so I was just asking Hayden about that.
Oh, okay. But yeah, so that is development. Let me know if I make sense or if I'm rambling. I'm just trying to make sure I get through everything with the
How
time
much
we
time
have.
do you need for the activity?
I honestly feel like it's gonna be very quick. It's more so just like here's, yeah, I think it's more so like, hey, like this
Like
is
a 10-minute thing?
Yeah, 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we'll be fast.
Okay.
Okay, so the second part is now production and post, right? So Development, it's like just development is a lot of work. It takes about, you should give yourself at least 3 to 4 months to like get your like maybe 3 months. Maybe I'm doing too much, but 3 months to make sure you get the pitch, the research right, and like you have your questions together and you have your casting correctly, because it's going to take a while to find people, depending on what kind of show you're trying to do. For me, because it's like my content is long form in terms of my podcast. They're talking about a lot of topics. It's like 2 hours per episode, sometimes 3 hours, which is crazy. And so I think that you just have to be more mindful of like honoring your podcast and what you need, and give yourself at least 3 months to just like get the development good, because that is the foundation of your house. And then production and post is like, okay, now I've gotten the guest speakers, I have all of this information available. Now I have to schedule the podcast sessions and like kind of start putting people in their silos of like, this, you're going to be in this episode because I think you're really strong here. And I also think it's important to ask people too, like for me, I'll be like, hey, like I may think that this person really speaks well to, like, we had a feminism episode where we had a group of, I had like 5 to 6 women come on the episode, on the show, and they were from every walk of life, all different backgrounds. Not, I think there was only 2 people who were like maybe similar backgrounds, but even still not even close. And so that episode, it's like I had like the last guest that I booked, she wasn't like, she probably didn't even think of being a part of that episode. And I was like, I really think you could speak to this. Can you please do this? Like, I feel like you would bring so much to it. And you just have an intuition about it, so that to be like, I think this person can really speak on this topic. And it usually works out perfectly, and they're usually very forthcoming. But you also don't want to burn out your guest speakers to the point where they're like, girl, you have me on 5 episodes. How many other ways can I say that this and this is this, So you just gotta be mindful of like not burning out your guest speakers. Also, not having too many guests. The one thing I can say that I could have done differently is like not having so many guests, not having guest speakers have to repeat each episode, because sometimes people want to have new faces and voices, and sometimes if you're like, but then sometimes people like the show, like these guest speakers, specific people, and they're like, oh, I wish they can come back on the show. So you bring them back depending on what the audience likes. So season 1, I had some guest speakers that people reached out to me and were like, oh, I really like them, are they going to come back? And then I brought them back for season 2. So yeah, so connect and prep with your guest speakers. So I think some people are like, some of my guest speakers were from Newhouse, so they were comfortable with kind of being on, not on camera, because my show's not on camera yet. I can't wait for it to be on camera one day. But like even just being recorded, so you kind of have to prep them and just be like, hey, like this is what we're gonna ask. Like, what do you feel comfortable with? What do you not feel comfortable with? Like, and just kind of go through that route of like, these are the questions we're going to ask. Is this in some of the questions that we have on my show are kind of like not yet kind of trauma based in a way. So you want to make sure that people are ready to have that kind of conversation, because they're going to be sharing that with the world. And you want to make sure that they're okay, if they're not the ones having that conversation, they're okay with being in that like in the room when that conversation is happening. So like, so to speak, like the Zoom room or whatever. And so you kind of want to prep them and make sure that they know like what to expect in the episode and things like that. But you don't want to make it so prepped that it sounds rehearsed. You want to make it sound free and comfortable. And then invest in software. So one of the biggest things I would say is like investing in yourself. Like the promotional video I showed initially, that cost me like $230 to make. But you know what? That is investment from my podcast that I feel like will make people like take my podcast seriously, will make people understand like what the podcast is about. It resonates, it's quick, I can send it to whoever and they'll understand where I'm coming from, right? And so you want to invest in not just like that kind of like editing software, because I thank you to Shayna, I was able to get a student from SU, Sabrina, to help me with that promotional. But in terms of like the editing for my podcast, I edit my podcast myself, because I thankfully from being a TA in the podcasting class learned how to use Audition. And so I edit my podcast myself. And just like, I invest in like Canva for my promotionals, even when it comes down to like even your guest speakers, right? when I'm booking my guest speakers and I'm putting out casting content, like casting, like join the show, I'm making sure that my casting bulletin, my flyer is very professional looking. It's very like to the point. And so I'm going to invest in Canva Pro or Illustrator or whatever, depending on the skills I have, to make sure that like my marketing for the show is top tier. Like people feel like it's a legit, because it is a legit show. Like you want to make sure that people know that this is legit. You're a part of something big, even if it may not be big, but I'm just saying so that they can invest in your content and so that your guest speakers show up to your show serious and ready. I feel like when I first started, I feel like people did take my show very seriously. Like my guest speakers have always been very supportive and very kind. But like, you never know. There's sometimes people might show up and be like, show up like 15 minutes late, which is unfair to other guest speakers because we're booking this time. Like some of this, I tell them, hey, we have from 1 to 3 p.m. to film. So, you know, like make sure you get here on time. And so you want to make sure that you're investing in the right software, whether it's scheduling or like Zoom, like investing in Zoom Pro, investing in Audition, Pro Tools, whatever you need to do to like take your podcast. I've seen Riverside, like start doing research of like what are the best podcasting tools. Even the mic I use, I got it from I think Sweetwater. Investing in a good mic, because even if the guests don't sound like the quality isn't great, even though Zoom is pretty good at sound quality, you want to make sure as the host your quality is amazing so that they sell you apart from everyone else. And then find supporting sound bites. So what do I mean by that? When you're having a show, you want to make sure, like, for example, I had an episode called Protect Black Women, right? And so I made sure that I wanted to like, I thought about what do I want people to feel from this episode, right? I want it to be a call to action. I want it to feel like I want you to feel like you understand what the panel is feeling, what the message is saying. And so I looked for a soundbite that kind of like encapsulated everything that the show was kind of like leaning towards or about. And so I had a soundbite that I found from TikTok of an individual who like kind of just said what I wanted to say, like I think a lot of women who are of color kind of want to say, so especially Black women. So adding that soundbite, I think takes your podcast to the next level. One of the things I've noticed is like even watching like YouTube videos of just like content creators who are like super, who've made it, like they understand meme culture, right? So they'll say something and it's a reference to a meme, and they'll add the meme to the video that they're making, and it just heightens the video because it's like now you can bond with the fact that you know that meme too and you're laughing at it, and it just makes it, depending on if they're trying to go for a comedy, it makes it more funny. Depending on if whatever they're feeling, they want to make you feel, it kind of really heightens it. So getting supporting sound bites has really helped a lot, especially if your podcast is only audio. It helps for people to like feel like they're not just listening, they're not just like sitting and listening to a show. It's like, oh, there's like texture that I'm hearing, and then when I'm editing episodes in post, I like to work in layers when it comes to working. So thank you to Shayna, because Shayna taught me how to be more organized. Because when I was at Newhouse and taking VFX and all that stuff and animation, I didn't understand why we needed to put things in folders and label them. And like, obviously you should understand that, but like, I didn't care about it as much. And so as I started working through my podcast, I'm like, season 1 has to have its own contained folder with little subsections in there. That's like, this is the intro, this is the outro. So that when I'm looking to do season 2, I'm doing this intro, outro, all that stuff. I already have it ready to pick up from. The same thing with just like, when it comes to layers, right? So I do it in sections. So I edit down the file for like the big chunk of the show, right? Then I'm like, okay, I want to add sound bites and timestamp here, timestamp there, right? So I'm like adding the timestamp. Then I'm like, okay, now that I've finished this section, which is like the chunk of the video, now I have to record the intro because it has to be different every time I showcase that it's a new episode. Then I add the intros, then I add the outros, then I sync it all together. And then I add like music to layer it. It's just like different layers. As you know, if you're an editor, you'll know like what I'm talking about. Just working in layers and sections will really help to organize your mind and make sure that you don't forget or miss anything, and having a to-do list of like, this in this episode, I want to have this at this time. I want to have this look working this way. And sometimes you might have like recording of you might record something and say, I feel like this section of the episode should be in the beginning. And then you just like have to remember to put a note of like, I want to move this section of the show to this soundbite, or like to this section of the clip or whatever. So that's layering. And then clean up and review. So always like listen to your podcast back, because you want to make sure that you're capturing everything and you don't miss up on anything, so that, because sometimes for me as a working with my distributor, he's not going to go and sit and make sure everything is good to go. He's just going to drop it in and be like, once you give it to me, it's completed work, right? So yeah, so I'm going to be like, okay, anything I'm submitting to him, it's done. Like I have reviewed it because I sat there and I listened to the podcast, even if it's like 2 hours, and I'm like, oh, you got to listen to it, right? And then one of the things that's helped me is, some people work weekly, right, with their podcast. They like record a podcast on Friday, they edit it down, and then they submit it the following week, right? Depending, or like the Monday or whatever. And so that's what I did for season 1. But I noticed that with my time, with my schedule, it's a really busy schedule. I don't have time to do that. So now I'm going to have to, what's helped me is I pre-record my episodes, like all episodes. So I pre-recorded all 14 episodes for season 2, 14 or 13 episodes for season 2. And then I like had everything edited down, and then a year later I released it. So yes, it might be a little bit more tedious, but it helps so that when you release it, you know that weekly, it just drops down. It's available Friday. I don't have to be like, oh shoot, I missed a week, because then it makes people feel like you're not consistent because you're missing a week, you know? So you want to make sure that people know consistently, I'm going to be dropping on Fridays. And then see, like the last part is release, right? So you want to make sure, this is depending on if you have a network that you're under like I am, or if you're just like, if you're solo, which is also very cool, like don't get me wrong, you want to make sure that, okay, I am releasing consistently, like I said, I'm releasing on all the platforms that are major platforms, so Apple, Spotify. I think Shayna mentioned that she listened on Podbean. Like, just make sure you get on as many platforms that you can, especially the big ones. And as I mentioned before, invest in yourself. So invest in like a promotional video or a teaser, things like that. And then think about media rollout, because once your podcast is out, now you have to think about the next step. How do I get people who don't know me to listen to my podcast? How do I get people who do know me to listen to my podcast? Okay, so I'm gonna have to think about the fact that you might not have your audience be your friends and family that listen to your podcast. It might just be your it might just be the random guy, a random guy on YouTube, or a random girl on YouTube. So you have to think about, okay, how do I get myself on different platforms? So I'm still working on YouTube and TikTok, but like now I have a social media page for Instagram, and like just slowly get yourself out there, and don't feel like you have to do it all at the same time, because content creation is not easy. My hat goes off to the people who do it, but you need to time it out, and also make sure that you're consistent so that people know you as a consistent person, because it really helps with your reputation in the business, and just helps with taking your content seriously. And then slowly, as you get better at Instagram, which I'm not lying, I need to do better at that. Slowly as you start getting better at Instagram, then you go into YouTube, then you go into TikTok, then you go into other platforms where you're like, okay, I can really start I'm getting my footing. I can put it here, put it there, and then I start to get more money from, like, get monetized. And then keep up with trends, like follow what people are liking. If you see, like, for example, there was a week we had this cancel culture, cancel conversation, right? And Chris Brown just recently had like a situation with someone, and it was like a domestic, not domestic, but like a altercation with someone. And then we so happened to be talking about, in this should Chris Brown be canceled? And so now it's like, oh, I should probably drop these two videos where it's two people saying he shouldn't be canceled and one person saying he should, on this specific day, because people are talking about Chris Brown, right? So thinking about like, when do I want to like drop my promo or like my reels about my podcast, little sound bites from the show to get people engaged and going. And also having like guest speakers who kind of like have a following does really help, because it makes people more inclined to like pay attention to you, and like it pushes you like through the reels. And then checking on audience response. Like for me, I check in with my distributor to be like, hey, how is the show doing? Like who's listening to my content? Who isn't listening to my content? And you always want to think, how do I make the people who aren't listening listen? So if my demographic for me is mostly women, how do I get more men to listen to my content? And so on and so forth. Like how do I change the perception, or how do I, maybe people might perceive my show as more liberal because we talk about LGBTQIA rights and things like that. Well, okay, understandable, but how do we get people who are Republican to listen to my show? Like things like that. And then if it doesn't work out season 2 or season 1, keep going. Season 3, we don't know what's going to happen, but I'm sure it'll be something where there's more content that everyone can listen to. So yeah. So, and then the last part, which I just remember to do, is celebrate. Like celebrate the fact that you just completed a whole process for creating your own podcast, season, show, episode, whatever, because if you follow these steps, you kind of like have it all in front of you, like how to like successfully put your stuff out there. Even if it gets like 2 likes, that is something compared to some people who did 0 likes, you know? So, and don't compare, okay? Just do your art, put it out there. Someone is watching, even if you don't think some of the biggest people are watching your like 2 views kind of show, and you may not even realize it. So celebrate your wins, celebrate the fact that you accomplished something like this, because it is a very big, steep mountain to climb. So that's that. And then this is just really quickly. These are like the little ways that I like, these are the videos that kind of help me for inspiration. So I initially basically stumbled up on the idea of having a show like Squeamish from the show called The Grapevine. It came out like years ago. I think they stopped like meeting, but it was such a profound show for me. Like I would literally come home and watch it on YouTube, like on my TV. Like that's how you know it was serious for me, because I was watching YouTube on my TV. But like it basically was a panel discussion with people from all walks of life, discussing things that affect Black and brown people, and it just really resonated with me. And so that is what the show's called. And then just like people like T. Neor, John Oliver, I love Jon Stewart, like all the Johns, amazing. FD Signifier, for Harriet, Mina Lee, and then I forgot her name, but she's amazing too. Like, and Madison Brown. Like, there's so many video essayists that I listen to and just sit down and like, that's another way that I get my research of like, what are the girls saying? What are the guys saying? What are people saying? And also watching what works. Like this video was like, I think 8 months ago, but a lot of her videos, you'll see 1.5 million people watching that. And it's 40 minutes long. Like, so obviously there's a market for it. Looking at what people are watching, like what videos are doing really like well, will help you kind of think, okay, this is a very big conversation. A lot of people want to, like, if 1.5 million people are tuning into this, then it's very serious, you know? So you might want to like think about this, and also think to yourself, how is this affecting me as a person? If it's affecting you and you're passionate about it, chances are you should probably talk about it. So yeah, so that's how I kind of get my inspiration. And
Hey,
then just,
Glory.
yeah, am I running out of time?
Yeah, a couple of people have to hop off soon, so I'm wondering if you
Oh
want to
my
do your
God, I'm sorry.
activity first and then
Yes.
the distribution.
Yes, sorry. So let's do the activity. So we're going to create our own podcast episode. So the episode that we're going to look into is the entertainment industry, then versus now. And why are we doing this episode? Because obviously I know that you guys are grad students. You've been in the industry, or you're just entering the industry, or any of those stages, or you're curious about the industry. And so it's like, what do you think about the entertainment industry when you first entered to now? And then you want to think about, okay, how is this episode authentic, right? What will this episode do in terms of like will people click on this episode? Like, is there enough traffic towards this type of topic? And then you have to think about longevity. So for me, because I know that I'm going to record a year from now, or like I'm going to drop a year from now, I want to make sure that what we're talking about is still relevant a year from now, which I'm sure with the way that the industry is going with strikes and things like that, people will be more likely to still want to listen to this content, because you don't know how the entertainment industry is going to go, especially with streaming. So that is the idea. So who needs to be on this episode? Obviously you guys and anyone else who is in the entertainment industry. What are the stakes? The entertainment industry is going through a change. It's pretty monumental. It affects a lot of jobs, a lot of people. And we need to figure out, like, is it sustainable, the change that's happening with AI and all these different things, and just where we see the industry going. And then obviously where the conversation needs to go, current trends, like I just mentioned, those things come into play. Guest speakers, strengths, weaknesses, needs. So, hey, like the needs are, I need guest speakers who are in entertainment or are passionate about it, who are paying attention. Now their weaknesses might be like, oh, this guest might just not feel comfortable sharing too much. So then is that the right person to be on the show? Like, then you have to think about those things. Strengths, this person has been in the industry for X, Y years, or strengths, this person has just entered and now is like going through hardship. You just never know. So scheduling, all of that. So now we're going to get into the questions, right? So my question to you guys, as people who are in the industry or just interested or passionate, like, where do you see the industry going? Do you feel like the industry is improving? Are you hopeful? Are you not excited about where it's going?
Are you speaking about a specific aspect of like, are you speaking generally about the whole kind of entertainment industry, or like specifically like podcasts or?
Entertainment industry in general. So like film, television, radio, whichever one you feel more comfortable talking about.
I hope that there'll be kind of like this is a little bit controversial, I guess, but like a death of like the auteur as a concept. Like I think that the like AI stuff and the idea that a style is kind of manifested through the conglomeration of a lot of different like inputs, like literally with AI it's like just taking a bunch of crap and then spitting out something. Like I think that the idea that there are these singular people that produce content is going to become more of like a collective kind of content producing, like where we stop thinking about content as being like the director made this and more like a collective group of people made this. Or like if AI did something that is kind of like the result of like a lot of different inputs, like more concretely even. So that's my take, I guess.
Okay, anyone else? Is anyone scared about AI or agrees with what Jacob said?
Yeah.
I agree with Jacob. I would love for us to get to that point. And I've been hearing conversations like this where we're talking about let's talk more categories for Oscars and things like that, where let's talk about the stuntman, let's talk about the stunt crew and people that are a part of the crew. You know, they without them, there is no project. Um, and I think being able to have categories like that creates conversations for things like that. And I think it's going to be a whole process. But I think the ball is rolling. I hope. But I think it needs to happen more.
Okay, I love that. And going off of what Hector said, so I know we have like strikes happening with Teamsters and actors and writers. Do you guys feel like the strikes are helpful? Do you feel like it's obviously so you want to have more money, you want to be paid your like rightful wage, but do you feel like it's hurting the industry more? And also, do you agree that like having more categories is the way to go?
I don't mind going if, well, I saw Hayden put like their hand up too. Hayden, do you want to go first on the subject and then I follow right after?
If you don't mind, because I've worked as a union official for a while. And I just have very strong thoughts on the matter. I think that any union organization is a net good, and strikes are necessary to get the people what they deserve. And what they deserve is much more than what they're given in literally every circumstance. It's something that needs to occur. And quite frankly, I think it needs to occur more, and it needs to occur in much, much stronger and more vocal means, because these industries are built on burnout. And if these groups don't organize and don't have a collective that allows them to come to the table with the people who actually have the money and say, hey, this is what we feel we are entitled to because of the work that we do for you. It's a broken system. And I mean, the existence of unions does not mean that the system isn't broken. It just means that the system has listened to, at one point in time, the right thing. Doesn't mean they've done the right thing after that point in time. It just means that once they listened, and if they listened once, they can listen again and again and again, and finally give the groups what they're worth. In terms of more categories at the Oscars, of course, like, you need to give credit where credit is due. I don't think that stunt people aren't deserving of awards. They work just as hard as anyone else. And again, this comes back into union and collective bargaining and organization amongst these groups. It's incredibly vital that they get the representation that they are entitled to for the work that they do, and then they get credit for the work that they do, and then they get compensated for what they deserve and not just what they do, because those are two different things. And then I'm a very vocal AI hater, and I think that it's stupid. And if I credited my wrench on everything that I built, then it would be a waste of time. AI is a tool, and tools get used, but tools are not what makes the thing. The man is what makes the thing, or I'm sorry, the dated phrase. The person is what makes the thing, and the tools are what's used. The person is the heart of the thing. If I had something that's handmade over something that's machine made, you can usually tell a difference. That's me addressing multiple things that you brought up, but those are my thoughts on the matter.
And I also wanted whoever wanted to go next.
Ryan.
You're
gonna follow that up?
I don't really have much to add on the front, and I'm coming from like a bystander role. I've been overviewing the current strikes on animation, since that's the field that I really want to get part of. And I have perspectives of my mentors that are in LA to my professor right downstairs. And as Hayden said before, yeah, is a net positive. This needs to be done 100%. And I think one of the things that I wanted to bring up was this clip I saw the other day. It was like Adam Conaway, I think, I forget like his last name, but he's been like a big representative of the Hollywood strikes when it came to the writers, and now he's a big representative when it comes to the animation strikes. And it was an animated video of someone that was storyboarding, and it had a tower of hats. And it was the fact that currently now, if you're not laid off from animation right now, you're currently having the hats of many other roles. So much so that if you don't do all these roles, you're fundamentally will be homeless. And it's a fear that corporate greed has on so many people that so much so that so much so that you have to adapt or not, and you have to adapt with AI right behind you, and the next person being in a competitive nature because they want to be part of this industry as much as you. So it's a fearful thing. It is a fearful thing. I'm hoping though that similar to the idea of the death of the auteur, we have the death of the corporate systems that make animation and media, and that it has to be regained to the creator, which you can see an uprise in indie works, but it needs to also have a backing from another source or multiple sources. Sorry if that was like a little bit of a ramble.
No, no, no. So even right now, like if you guys can tell, like you kind of have to like listen to where the conversation's going and like where people are getting passionate about things. Like, Hector mentioned like unions, and then I believe Hector mentioned, and then Hayden kind of, added to that with his background. And so that kind of helped to like you guys can feel the passion already of like, oh, this is very important. And if we had more time, I'd have asked you guys about burnout culture and like, do you feel like the entertainment industry enables burnout, And so you start thinking about like when you're interviewing guests, you're thinking like yourself, how would you feel in this? Even if you're not a part of that industry, like let's say I'm interviewing doctors, doctors experience burnout too, I'm sure. So you think, okay, I can relate to burnout, so let me ask them about this question. And that's kind of how you push your conversation forward and like kind of like listen to what one person says and like extrapolate a piece of what they have said and use that for your next question. And like we can have this literally can go on and on and on like a Russian doll. Like we can literally keep having a conversation about more and more topics in entertainment because there's so many ways that you can listen to what people are saying and like gather like, oh, this is what I really should be focusing on. Even if I have like a whole script ready and with questions ready for the guests. So that's kind of like how to create a podcast episode of like, at least because I already showed you like the whole process of like releasing and development and all that stuff. But this is like, if in real time, like this is how I'll be asking you like the guest speakers questions. This is why I picked this specific topic for like, because it's such a general topic that can touch so many people. Because even people who are not in the entertainment industry can be affected by the entertainment industry, like viewers, people who like to stream content on Netflix, people who are passionate about animation because they just love watching animation can also feel like sad about the way the industry is going and the content that's being created or backed by whoever and things like that. So yeah, thinking about that. And also, as you can see, as the host, I can't be like, you're right, I can't be biased and be like, I agree with you, because it's not about me, it's about you guys. And it's also about making sure that whoever is listening to this, if they don't agree with you guys, they should also have a right to listen to this episode and like take it in because you took your time to talk about this. Your words matter just as much as their words matter as well, especially if they were to be able to be on the show as well. So yeah, so that is kind of like how to make a podcast episode, guys. I'm just gonna really quickly, I think that's it. Distribution, Underdog Podcast, that's where I'm under. I'm sure Sheena will share this document with you guys if you guys ever want to check them out. And then why podcasting? So for me, I got into podcasting because I want to tell stories. I am a creative at heart. Don't ever stop creating. I think that people think that because you work a 9 to 5, you can't be creative. There's so many people who work at my job that are writers, that they and not because we work at a theme park and everything, they work in legal and they write on the weekends. Like, just create. I get into podcasting because I have a story to tell. I have guests who have stories to tell, and I want to tell amazing, like normal, regular, beautiful, boring stories. I want to tell stories. I want to tell content. I want to show what's going on. And I think anyone who wants to be a storyteller, anyone who honestly goes to Newhouse has that same feeling of like, I have something to say. And if I don't have something to say, other people do. And I want to amplify those voices and highlight those situations. And yeah, so yeah, that is why podcasting. do you guys have any questions for me? I will stop sharing and go from there. I'm sorry if I spoke a lot and I didn't look at the chat.
There's an active chat. No, you didn't miss anything. I think we brought it
Okay.
all questions came out in
I think Chris wanted to respond as part of the discussion, but I don't know.
Hi, Debrina.
I know I wanted to be part of the podcast activity, but I'll
Oh
talk about it.
no.
I'll talk about it after. I'll talk about it after.
Oh,
Thank you so much, Gloria.
I'm
This is
still
great.
recording.
we're still recording. If you guys want to stick around, we can keep the conversation going, whichever one works. Or if you guys want to ask questions and then do that, whichever one.
I want people to ask questions first. I don't have any questions at the moment.
Okay. Any questions, guys?
yeah, how much I'm editing. So it's like, so the recording of the podcast, do you try to keep it? And is this like a stylistic choice? Like it's per podcaster? I just don't, because it seems some are pretty polished, right? And some feel very like open activity kind of thing. And length too, right? Like, so your approach, like how much editing and you fitting into a specific time, or how does that work for you?
Oh no. So I honestly need to get better at like being more mindful of like no one these days want to listen to like unfortunately a 2 hour, 3 hour long podcast. So I do try to be mindful, excuse me, about like where the conversations to stop. But for the most part, I really do feel like there's a point of having this conversation and I want to honor that. And so I will normally like we'll have days where we're recording 4 hour sessions and then we'll literally like when I come into editing, I'm like, okay, there was a lot of like pausing here. So I'll take out the pauses. Then I'll be like, okay, maybe then I also I reach out to guests of like, hey, like I understand that, maybe some people work in corporate and so they're like, I said this part, I don't want to keep it. Can we take this out? And that also helps to bring it down. And then for the Protect Black Women episode, that was super passionate for me. And I really wanted to honor those women who spent time. We spent like 5 hours on that episode. And so I split that episode in half and I had a part 1 and 2. So obviously you might not get people to listen to part 2 because some people are like, well, damn, that's like a long episode. But to be honest, the people who are passionate about it will appreciate that you took the time to like give that type of, for me, it's like a labor of love. Like I'm not thinking like, oh, that money, we need to make sure the times are cut. Like I'm thinking this is art, this is content, this is people's lives. Like you want to tell stories. And I feel like it's like when you're a journalist, like you're not thinking like, oh, let me take that out because that's a long essay. You want to make sure you find a way to like creatively tell like this person went through this such situation and this is what's affecting them right now. So I do try to be more mindful when it comes to editing, but I'm not gonna lie. I'm not saying I'm the best editor. I'm not saying that, but I definitely do try to like, I'm more like fluid in terms of what I'm feeling,
Sure.
I was just gonna say, from listening to some of the episodes, I kind of appreciated that you didn't cut out pauses and that you had, when you would ask a question, there would be like
pause.
People are thinking. So it kind of helps you also think about how you would
answer that question.
Answer the question, and then you kind of like get into it. So I like that. I think other people would cut all that out and that's how they would make it shorter. But I think it's helpful for the types of discussions you're having.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I especially for the Protect Black Women episode, there were even the pauses were actually longer than that. And I was like, okay, I wanted to still highlight that there is a pause because I know in this moment someone will understand why there's a pause. Like, oh, this is a very intense topic. If people responded quickly, it'll be weird. Like, why would you need some time to think about this? So I'm thinking like as a human being, like how would I respond to this? But also being mindful of the editing, like, okay, this might be too much time. And sometimes people are afraid to go first. And so they're like, and so you want to take that out a little bit, but still showcase that, oh, they're afraid to go first. Like, so yeah. Yes, all about the balance. I should probably look at the chat.
Right.
But yeah.
Glory, right? I just want to make sure.
Yes, yes.
I wanted to say that this was an amazing session.
Oh, thank
I'm
you.
currently multitasking, so I did treat this also like a podcast, but I did have
Oh,
fun with this activity. I'm so sorry if that sounds rude, but I
don't
thought
be
it had a
sorry.
comedic in my head.
No, I don't worry.
I wanted to ask, and this is coming from someone that really wants to be active on like social media. I want to be able to send my content out in a scheduled manner. Like, how do you keep up with that if you have like a sort of schedule where you're like, oh, I'm gonna post every Friday? Because like I tried that for like a week or two on like LinkedIn, and and the 1 week I got sick, I just stopped. I was like, oh no, no more content. I don't want to make content, or I don't want to share content, or like whenever I look at the idea of sharing content and I'll have like a bucket load, I just be like, another day. So like,
No,
what keeps you focused and not sidetracked?
so I'm gonna tell you right now, I'm working on that. So for me, because we're very transparent here, we do not hold back. So for me, I had a plan of like, I'm gonna roll out this video and do this and do that. And then one of the things that I wish I could have done, but obviously financially, you have to think about, okay, financially, can I afford to do this like that? Was that I was gonna like pay like Sabrina to like do multiple reels for me, not just the promotional, so that there's someone I'm paying someone to like do it, you know? So if I had like money to do that, that would be a great way to keep on schedule because you are working with someone. It's not just you kind of doing it by yourself. But bye Roman. It was nice meeting you. But for me, I think that the best thing I could give advice to because of based on how I've messed up in this situation is um don't stop just because you had a weird week. Like you may take a break, like have a moment where you're like, okay, dang, I got sick. I haven't done it in 2 weeks. I haven't done it in 3 weeks. Just start again. I promise you, it's actually one of the things I've noticed is my reels are doing better because I'm away from it. Like people are like engaging with my reels while I'm away, and I'm like, how I haven't even I need to be better at posting. What's going on? So sometimes the idea that you have to be consistently posting all the time, I think is like sometimes it's overkill because everyone works crazy hours sometimes, not all, but there are people who have jobs, have 9 to 5s, have busy schedules, and you get burnt out from work already. So you don't want to burn yourself out from your podcast or your passion project, your creative projects, because then it's like once you burn yourself out in that aspect, it kind of like defeats the purpose of creating. And then you start feeling like you can't create at all. And then it takes the fun out of the situation. So I feel like you need to just, the best thing I would do, and for me, is like, I will go back to posting reels again. I know I will, but I'm not going to burn myself out in the process of trying to get more engagement. Naturally and organically, the things that happen for me and are meant for me will find me. That's how you see it. And then slowly taking time for yourself, prioritizing your self-care. If it means 2 months away from posting, maybe 3 months, take that time because you come back a much stronger person because you listen to yourself than like pushing and trudging through the mud to just like post something, you know? So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Also, I love your pro. And another thing is that when you showed like all the different
Thank you.
like video essayists, I was like so excited because I saw Tina or Empty Signifier. I'm like,
I love her. Yes. Yeah, no,
have you listened to Kadeja? What's her last name? Kadeja Roway?
I feel like I probably do. There's so many that like you know when you click on one and you just like subscribe, they subscribe,
They're all
they
connected.
push, yeah, they start pushing out more that you're like, oh, okay. And it's as long as it's topics that I'm interested in, especially because I work a desk job in a way, like I'm always listening to a podcast, I'm always listening to a video essay. Click that. That is my bread and butter. I will listen to that and get some content, get some information.
Put me on some more.
I will email Shayna all the things I'm like, yes. Even like it's so crazy, like just the most eccentric things that you're like, I don't even how am I like I love this show called Y-Files, which is like a sci-fi show. That makes me think about like because they talk about like sci-fi, but it also talk about the government and like different things like that. That's a podcast episode. whatever you're passionate about is a podcast episode in a way. Even like nacho cheese, that's a conversation. Why do people like nacho cheese? Why is the cheese so orange?
What
You
is the
never
cheese
know.
for?
Those are questions people want to know. So, yeah. Any other questions, guys?
I have a quick
Oh,
one.
sorry. Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. I am about to hop off for now. I just very quick one.
Yes.
I was curious if we could get your contact from Shayna, if that's possible.
Yeah.
I'm actually producing a podcast for WAER local station here, and I'm planning on doing my own. So just tons of questions I want to ask you on
Yes.
software and tech and stuff, but now is not the time. Uh, so is it okay if I ask Shayna for that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. All
Or
right.
Glory, if you want to put the email you prefer in the chat.
Yes. Here, put it in my.
Yeah, but all I wanted to say, and I think you guys were kind of talking about it right now too, but the development process is so underrated. Specifically, for me, a big thing is spending a lot of time doing research and batching. Like you don't need to do all the work as soon as possible, and that really helps with the process. Once you get that sort of automated system for yourself, whatever works,
It
get
really
the
does
ball rolling.
help.
Yeah.
It helps a lot, especially if you have a busy schedule. Like I, at first I was gonna just do weekly, like every week I'll just like record and then I'll just post. But then after a while, I'm like, I know I'm gonna like have, like Ryan mentioned, like I'm gonna have times where I get sick and I'm like, I can't post, and I don't want to have that situation happen because it's kind of like even people talking about YouTube creators, like when they leave for like a month and they come back and their engagement is low because they're not posting consistently. And so I knew for at least, even if it's not my reels, my podcast, I want to have show up consistently for people, so that they know like, oh, episodes are going to drop weekly. And she's always, I know on Fridays, this is who I'm going to go to. And it also helps with stress. So
Perfect. Well, thank you very much.
yeah, well, thank you. It was nice meeting you.
Cool. Do we want to go back to people who wanted to answer your questions so you get more editing practice?
I know.
Like edit all of this whole thing.
It's just so great.
We'll edit out your company name. Don't worry.
Yes, please do. I was like, oh my God, why did I say that?
Yeah, Ryan. We could stay on. I gotta tuck my kid in, and then my mom's calling me.
Oh no.
Do you have time tomorrow, Ryan? Like I have time between class like 12 to 2 or before class till 10.
I will be willing to do either or.
So could you stay after class then maybe?
I have a funny answer and I have a respectable answer. The funny answer is, would you be willing to offer me lunch? The second answer is, I would be more than willing to. I would have to skip lunch.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because if the cafe is fine, then yeah, we can do that as long as it's in the building because I can't leave the building.
That is fine by me. I just don't want to waste all my bomber bucks. They kind of went downhill. But yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much, Glory. This has been awesome.
Thank you so much. It's nice meeting you, Brad.
Likewise. Take care.
Bye.
Chris,
Okay,
I assume you have a
Yes.
animation motion graphics thing in response to Ryan's thing.
I do.
Okay.
Well, not semi-related, right? So, I actually just got back from the motion graphics conference, and a lot of these speakers, who are kind of at the top of their game, are talking about these AI tools being used in our workflows, like throughout all sets of pre-production and post-production. And I mean, this one man who is I think he's the executive communications director at Buck. His name is Justin Cohn, and he was talking about these tools that are used to like rig 3D models that are already available online to use in your edits. Using tools on your iPhone called like iMove to record yourself doing a dance and getting that rig done in AI using Maximo, which is like an online AI 3D rigger, and then bringing that into Cinema 4D and exporting what you need that way. So he compared it to using like a painter compared to a photographer back in the olden days, where a family would maybe commission a painter to do a portrait of their family, and then maybe a different family would want a photo because it's quicker and easier and perhaps cheaper. And I can see, at least in VFX and motion graphics work, where there is going to be fast cash grab AI tool flashy stuff, and there's also going to be boutique studios who do use Maya to model all their 3D stuff, and or use Cinema 4D and go through all the steps. So it's very divisive of like where you draw the line of when it's a tool and when it's replacing artists. But a lot of these guys at the top are using these tools to kind of push their way forward, technology wise, to make more and to make something new, because this is a hot topic that is a new look, that's something we've not seen before. So it's very interesting. I kind of lean against AI. But again, using it as a tool, I've used generative fill in Photoshop for sure. It's quick and easy. But when it comes to those details being replaced with machine learning, I don't know, I get a little iffy about it. I would much rather be a boutique person who paints portraits than a cash grabbing photographer in this sense. Not saying photography is easy, because I'm not good at that either. But when you're comparing the two, there's very different art forms, and yeah, it's interesting hearing these people at the top kind of talk about it as if like it is the new path forward. So
Brian, you mentioned you like AI tools. You want to talk, like, add on to Chris or push back, whichever one?
Oh, no, I don't think it's really a pushback per se. I know someone mentioned about that they don't like AI like zero. I don't know, was it you, Chris?
no, I think that was that Hayden maybe?
It might have been Hayden or someone else, but like they
That
were
was
like,
absolutely me, and I'll stand
that was
by that and
absolutely
defend
you
it.
standing on business. Okay,
I
you
will
stand on
argue
business.
against that anytime.
That's I believe that generative AI. Okay, so how can I say this? I believe AI tools, emphasis on the tools, can be helpful. It For me, being like a 3D artist and someone that really wants to break into this field, it has helped me so much to get works, or at least build works that might be able to get the eyes of other people. Um, I believe that it will help a step in a lot of junior artists. However, I do not believe it is the end all be all and or the first move that one should make in order to be able to get into animation fields or VFX fields. Um, I know that I'm working on this big project for the park school. We have our Halloween event. We want to be able to use the LED wall in order to take a lot of great photos with the students in their Halloween outfits. So I have to work on multiple environments in Unreal, and then also make sure that there's characters or something special in each environment, so that when people get up to this LED wall, they're not only looking at the environment, they're looking at the fact that they're like, wait, who's that in the distance? And then they get spooked. It's an immersive experience. I have enough time to work on all the environments, but I'm not really the best at rigging. I'm still learning it with Brad, and he was even telling me a lot of the faulty things that I was doing. So tools like Mixamo are so helpful in that, because now I'm able to work on something that I can dream to realize, and then people will see it in a quicker time and format. Generative AI like Midjourney, I use Midjourney. I'm gonna be so honest. I use Midjourney for reference, and that's it. I wish Midjourney and a lot of generative AIs had properties in order to show guidelines and resources of every source it used in that very algorithm to generate. I think that should be rule, and that should be like, it should be like a 10 commandment for AI. Just like, give me the notes of every artist you use. Because then from there, I can go straight to that artist. And I feel like that would be great for me, because I like to commission. I'll give my money out and I regret it later. But at least I have art. I think from there I don't really have much to say rather than the fact that um AI can be helpful if used the right way. It'll definitely be helpful. And I think from here, the ones that use AI correctly will be the ones that can be able to use it in a beneficial way. Whereas those that solely use AI, you will know that is fake and furthermore not in an artistic light. I think that's where I'm like getting it from. So yeah, Hayden. I don't.
Wait,
Well,
before Hayden speaks, I have one more thing to
Gloria's
add.
I think, what was I saying?
But Ryan, that's great, and I agree with a lot of those points you were mentioning. There was one presenter at this motion graphics conference, the presenting for Laundry Studio, and they do a lot of stuff for the Sphere at Las Vegas. So, a lot of spherical, a lot of new technology, which is really interesting. It was really cool. And they were talking about these experimental designs they were doing with using AI animation. Some guy did a Maya model of this sneaker that they were advertising. He had a general idea of what the storyboard, what he wanted, and he curated this AI using a bunch of different nodes that I cannot for the life of me remember. I'm a layers-based person, not a node, but I'm getting there. And it got a lukewarm response from the audience. So I'm wondering how much curation needs to be used in association with AI in order to market as your own and not generated per se. It was an interesting talk. Hayden, go ahead.
I just am of the opinion that every tool is a hammer, you know? Like you can use AI to do whatever you want. That's its purpose. But knowing how to do it yourself and knowing specifically what you can use to complete a task is where the joy of creation comes from. And not to undercut using things like Midjourney to find references, but also that's just, to me, that feels like adding an extra step in your research where you're using something and finding elements of things and then saying, I like this element, let me see where it's from, instead of, looking for in your mind what you think that element should have been and finding it without having to Midjourney generate it in the first place. But Shayna also knows that I am a Luddite and think that the internet should have stopped with tin cans on string. So it's a very, I'm all for tools. I build bikes in my free time. That is the epitome of specialized tools that serve one purpose and you can't use them for anything else. That being said, I absolutely hate that. And I think that every tool should be able to serve its function and also teach simultaneously. And I just don't think that AI and AI generated things has obviously it has the longevity because it's all the rage these days, but I don't think that in coming iterations, as we look towards the future, if it becomes the dominant tool, then we fall back to every tool is a hammer. And it's just one thing doing the same thing over and over and over again, because if you brute force something enough, it'll do what you ask it to. The joy of creation is building with your own hands and knowing how to do something. Not that the technical mastery is easy, because everything is hard and the 1,000 hours rule and whatever, but I am very hesitant to utilize anything AI or AI tools in my own work, because I feel that if I do so, whatever I release will not be mine. If that makes any sense.
I have a quick response. Something I was saying to Shayna actually the beginning of the session is that I think that any kind of creative activity is at some layer of abstraction from the base of doing something. So if you use a computer, then you're essentially not necessarily knowing how the interworkings of a computer work. I'm going to school for doing computer animation, and I'm actually learning from a basic level how a computer works, but I don't think you need to know how a computer works to do animation. It just helps me because I can, if I want to, do things at a very basic level, and I could work with quote unquote my hands, but I don't think you need to. I think that you can work at any layer of abstraction from like the basic hands-on approach and it'd be a valid approach to doing work. Like there's a lot of tools that are artist friendly. And I think if you say that you need to be able to work with your hands, then you're essentially saying that any kind of artist friendly like working environment is antithetical to the creative process because it's separating you from like the like lower level coding that needs to go into kind of doing an activity. So I would just say you don't need to code to make art. And if you're using AI, then you don't necessarily need to know how to use a camera to make a photo in the same light. That being said, I do want to know how to do things at a lower level, but I just don't think that everybody needs to have to. So that's my take.
Interesting. Eric, do you have anything to say? I saw you said something in the chat.
I mean, yeah, for me, it's just all about striking that balance, like I was saying before, because, as a working compositor right now, I actually am someone that uses some degree, keyword some degree, very small, just generative fill, basically. That's the only form of AI that I really use because a lot of the times when I'm trying to do a paint job, it actually does an astounding job. But even though I can do iterations and that's part of the artistry where it's like you are the one still like mostly in control of trying to find that right look. Like AI can only go so far in all of its iterations and then you have to do paint work on top of that, extra manual work on top. So uh for me it's like there will be a place for it, but at the same time I don't agree with anyone that thinks like it'll be the end all final product maker because I've seen a lot of AI generated stuff and like while it's impressive, people talk about the uncanny valley when they like look at like say bad CGI and they like get turned off by it. That's what the AI generated stuff does for me too. It's like it's a little too uncanny where it's uncomfortable. And I feel like if people start getting into that point, they're not going to really like it. So there will be a place for it for sure, just like how model makers back in the practical and special effects days before digital and CGI came to the forefront. Like that's one thing I always think about when I see all this panic of AI. It's like these artists also panicked when 3D came into the world. Like they thought their jobs were going to be taken. But no, not I mean to some degree, but it was adaptable because you can apply that same knowledge of like what you do when you make a model practically, just digitally using a mouse instead of your hands. So.
Bye, Ryan. Nice meeting you. Yeah, I had a question and so if not AI, then what's the next thing that you guys see happening? Like if AI, like let's say runs out of time next year and people stop looking at it, what would you think would be the next step? Since you mentioned that it's not like the end all, it may not be the end all be all. Where do you see the industry going after AI, essentially? Or is it too hard? Is it hard to tell that?
I mean, I think AI might be like is the next thing, but it's probably going to go hand in hand with artists on set using like doing virtual production. I know that's been talked about a lot recently. Maybe someone has something more to say about that.
Well, I think generally things are just going to get more distributed. Like, if not AI, then like whatever tool somebody is using is just going to be more like you're going to be able to more distribute work to like a lot of people could work on something from different places or A lot of people can have access to information so that they can do things that wouldn't have been possible 50 years ago. People in 50 years will be able to do things that weren't possible now because there'll be more access to information at your hands. So even if AI wasn't a thing, just the internet is still, I think, making things more accessible to people. So I think accessibility is going to be a large thing that continues to become more of a thing. It's going to be, things will be more accessible to people who don't have maybe even like some degree in something or whatever.
Yeah. I think as a tool, it will mostly still be around, again, depending on which tool you refer to. As a trend, in terms of like people using it to make art, I think you could look at that as like 3D, where it's like cool gimmick, but it's not for everyone, and it just goes in waves of like interesting at one point, but then people kind of fall off that bandwagon after a while.
I do have a question, just a curiosity. Do you feel like people prefer there's like a need or want for 2D animation now, or is it like people are like 3D animation is kind of like how we're gonna go forward? Like
Uh,
anyone?
I have something to say about that.
Yeah.
I think that's a perfect example of what I'm saying about like when hot and flashy 3D stuff compared to like boutique stuff, like specific studio created art. So I think cell animation, like 2D frame by frame animation, is like a niche that is an expensive product to make, and it's costly, and it takes a lot of time and people. And 3D, I think, is because I think requires there's less permanence because you can always change the model, I think, mid production, and I think there's some more leverage that way. Every person lecturing at this motion graphics conference was a 3D generalist adjacent they were all, it was all 3D people. I did not see a single 2D animator during my time there, which I was a little bummed about. I actually mentioned cell animation to someone and they didn't know what that was.
I think compositors are 2D animators.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jacob.
As long as there are screens that exist in 2 dimensions and pixels, you'll need people that can work in 2 dimensions. Everything, even in 3D, still needs to be rasterized to 2 dimensions. Compositing needs to happen. So until there's no TVs and no phones and everything is VR, then 2D will need to be a technical skill.
If I may jump back to an earlier point, only because I am not a working animator. What you were saying before about, if AI stops or if it didn't exist, I think things would be the same as they were prior to AI's creation. And let's just stop and assume for a second that AI was never created. Let's go even further and say that digital was never created and every piece of medium still needs to be done on celluloid, right? The system in which we currently live, capitalism's very existence, suggests that it would eventually reach a point where anyone can do it. Because previously, the bar for entry was money and not experience. Now the bar for entry is access. And with the internet, that bar for entry is being lowered. But previously, it was who can afford a camera, who can afford a film, who can afford development. If that was the system and that system maintained, then that bar would just get lowered and lowered and lowered over time because of the system in which we live. That's what the Kodak Brownie was with 35 millimeter. And it would just become the norm and everyone would be able to do it regardless. And I know I'm speaking in hypotheticals here, but trends show that that is what would happen. I don't think I'm, making a stretch when I propose this. And so as a result, like I say again, currently the bar for entry is access. If you have access to a computer, then in theory, you can do the work. You can teach yourself or you can use AI to do it for you. Now more people are having access to computers and technology that can do that. but it's not as if it's without the learning phase. And maybe again, I think the internet should have stopped with cans on string, but I don't think you should make something and not know how it was produced beyond AI did it. I think if you're going to use something, you should have a fundamental understanding of how it works and why it works. It's the internal combustion engine thing. You know, like the Industrial Revolution occurred because people knew how something worked and how to utilize it to do other things. With anything that you have, whether it's a car you drive or a program that you utilize, you should at least understand at the very basic level why it does what it does and how you can use that to your advantage. Animation, I feel, follows similar principles. You need to know that, you know, moving an image in XYZ will create the illusion of motion, and thus you can tell a story on that plane that was two-dimensional. Now you're working in 3 dimensions. Okay, how can I create an image that's 3-dimensional? Great. How can I get that 3-dimensional image onto a 2D plane so I can show it to other people, et cetera, et cetera. It's about knowledge first and foremost, and that has no bar for entry. If you want to learn, you can learn now that we have the access to. Previously, that was more difficult, but with public organizing occurring in many places and things like community centers and public libraries now having more and more multimedia stations, at least in the area that I live. I know that's not consistent across the country, but it's a growing trend again. So I don't think I'm making a stretch when I say that people will have more access to the knowledge they need to learn how to do these things. It's becoming less of an impossibility.
Do you think that when people were working on film and they would make essentially generative work by burying their film in the ground and letting worms crawl over it, that was not art because they didn't understand the fundamental processes that were going on underneath the earth when the film was being processed?
They did understand those processes. That's why they did it.
They
That was
understood
the point.
something
You cannot explore unless you test. Everything has to have a lab rat. And once it was done once, those people might not have known, but eventually the chemistry was secure and they figured out why what was happening happened. Experimental filmmaking is a totally separate thing. And also, I don't think generative is the right word to describe it because it was incredibly deliberate in what they did. The creation of film in general was the result of a team of chemists who knew exactly what they were putting on plastic. There was no guesswork in Kodak's formula. There was at the beginning, but when they released it to the public, which is when film started to become, you know, again, accessible to the masses, it was entirely controlled, and it was a monopoly, which was resolved, but the point still stands. Like, I don't think the what you're describing is a very different beast than the generative imaging that is utilized today.
I just don't understand, like, do you think that someone would have to be a chemist to be able to use film? Like, I don't understand the argument that you need to know how everything works. Can you explain that more?
You don't need to be a chemist to know how film works, but the people who are chemists are the ones that make your film work, and they know how it works.
So if you make art and you're not a chemist, like you're not understanding how the film works, does that mean you're not as good an artist as someone who is a chemist?
No, it means that you are doing something different. It's apples and oranges here. The people who develop your film did not make your film for you. You made your film, but your film would not exist without them. They know what they did. You know what you did. And if you're using film and you don't know how it works, your film will not look good. That is the very basis of film.
I don't understand that. If I'm using film and I don't understand how film works, why can't my film be good? Like, I don't like I need to understand physically how it works. I don't understand.
That's what light metering is. Yes, it won't be good. You'll have underexposure or overexposure. And if you know that you have those things and you say to the chemists, I did this, I need it to be adjusted as such, they will make it look the way you want it. These two things go together. I'm not saying you're not an artist. I'm simply saying that there are places where knowing what you're using and how it works is necessary. And you don't have to know everything about it. That can be someone else's job. Absolutely. Division of labor. But it is still kind of important that you know at the most fundamental level why what you're doing works. I can hand anyone a camera loaded with film and say, take a picture. That doesn't mean the picture will look good.
I think you're assuming that AI can't be an iterative process. Like you're assuming that someone just uses it and then whatever comes out is what they use. But like someone who understands, like someone who uses AI, like I've used AI, it's an iterative process. I look at the image, and if it doesn't look good, then I continue to iterate based on knowledge I have about filmmaking. Like even if you presume what you're saying is correct, you can still use AI with knowledge of filmmaking, and you don't need to use a physical light meter. You can look at the film and say, or you can look at the AI image and say, this is underexposed because I know what underexposure looks like, and I can iteratively make another image. So you can still use AI and use knowledge of filmmaking through an iterative approach. I think you're assuming that like you can't do iteration with AI, that it's just a one-shot thing.
But
But
how is that knowledge gained? How do you know what underexposure is?
Well, I feel like we had a great run. This was great, guys. I know this is really passionate, but I know that it's kind of late over there by you guys too, so I don't want to keep the conversation going too long. I did have one last question about like, which is like 1 or 2 sentences, guys, okay? Where do you see entertainment going? Are you excited about where the entertainment industry is going? Are you hopeful, especially as someone who works in the industry, and also for people who are viewing it, the audience, like people who are not in the industry? Are you excited to, like, do you feel like, yes, with everything going on, things are still looking up?
That's not a good sign.
I'll
I
just say I don't like
think kind of
capitalism.
evolve, right? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Jacob.
No, I don't like our economic system either. I'm not like an adventure capitalist like that thinks that like AI should be like all like everything is and like is like owned by one person. So as long as our economic system is exploitative to artists, I think that we're going to have issues with the future of artwork. So I'll just say that.
Don't all go at once. Anyone?
I hope with the entertainment industry, after all of this kind of not to say that mass appeal hasn't always been a thing, but with huge monumental projects like Marvel Universe and Disney stuff, they are definitely big technology pushers, but I also hope, I think it will bleed down into like the more lower budget films where maybe indie films can start using these high-end VFX and animations to bring auteurship back, kind of like I know A24 is a big like auteur um studio that gives their directors a lot of stuff to do themselves, and that's why they're have kind of successful, kind of like Miramax before them. So that's interesting. I think that maybe it's a little cyclical, and then maybe like big movies will come back and they'll go back to little movies being the popular, and round and round it goes.
Definitely need to slow down the sequel, prequel, reboot train. That's for sure.
Can you elaborate on that, like 1 or 2 sentences?
Uh yeah, I mean, more people just want originality these days, or at least originality. They want stuff that's just not what you've seen already. I've seen a lot of people complaining about like, oh, there's another Marvel movie, there's, this Disney live action reboot, or it's like it's just stuff we've seen before. So it's like give us something new because the stuff that's popular now got popular because of the originality from the first iteration back in the day. So I think finding the roots in that and just pure creativity and not just cash grabs will be beneficial in the long run.
Anyone else? Ruben? I don't think I've heard from Ruben. How are you?
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add, I don't think. Yeah.
That's all good. Hayden, Jacob, Japrina.
Well, I talk too much, so I don't have much to say. I'm trying, I hold my tongue on all of it, but I personally, I like new things. I like innovation. I like all this stuff. I use AI on a daily basis to make my email sound more professional. I use it for resumes. I use it to do replies to even like I have friends online that's making money online. Like people, that's how I look at it. I look at it as, you know, people aren't perfect and AI will never be perfect. So I don't think we got nothing to worry about at the end of the day. All we should really worry about is the people who can't tell the difference between AI and what's real. But it's really taking a lot of people from, you know, working at home, not having to work a 9 to 5, be able to do things at home with AI, make money, take care of their families, and not have to be, in half an hour traffic. I know people creating full books, creating coloring books. People are creating like whole event planning services because they're using AI to create invites, backdrops, all types of stuff. So it's really moving people from different tax brackets, So I personally love AI and what it can do for people who, didn't know this stuff existed before. And at the end of the day, every single person in the world will not know how to use it at the end of the day. Just like when computers came about, you had all people who was like, I don't know what that is. It's too much. They didn't want it's still people today who don't even have laptops. It's still people today who don't even be on social media because I don't like that social media. Oh, it's this, and this. Well, that's fine. You can stay where you at. But I want to stay what's next. I want to stay in the new. And if it fade out, oh well, it fade out. Tell me what's next, because I want to be on that too. And that's all I'm gonna say.
Oh wow. Snaps. I did want to ask though, because you mentioned like the pros of it, but like what about the cons, like, like the deep fakes and like getting
I
into
mean,
the
it's gonna
world of
always,
like
yeah, it's gonna always be a long list of cons, but everything has cons, right? Everything has cons, but that's why it's always good to start creating those limits. Like even now, they let you put AI labels on your reels. AI labels on on Facebook. Let them know that this was created with AI. They may not use it, but it's there, And over time, if you use this too much, people are going to be able to tell anyway, Even like the AI videos, they just start making some videos, but you can tell when those videos be looking a little bit too shifty. Like you can tell, and it's like, so at the end of the day, once it get used so much, people will eventually learn the difference. But I mean, it's gonna have its flaws. Everything has its flaws, just like AI itself has flaws. So it's always good and bad to anything new that comes along, just like it's bad stuff about the internet. But at the same time, like I said with AI, the internet is having a lot of people make money that couldn't make money before. So that's how I look at it.
Sorry to keep talking, but I do have one
Go
thing.
ahead, yeah.
I think that like there's an extent to which you can regulate these technologies that will help a lot, like government regulation, but I also think that there are things that you don't need to make illegal that you can essentially like incentivize people to not do. Like deepfakes are a problem, but at the same time, like there are problems that don't need to be like you don't need to get rid of the reason why those problems exist. Like you don't like cheating on your spouse is a bad thing, but you don't need to make that illegal. It's just frowned upon societally. So I think if we can like socially kind of make things less like desirable to do, we can also like make them not happen as much. So I think there's some like ability to socially kind of make some of the downsides of AI happen less by just making it like not something that is like socially acceptable without having to just get rid of the entire tool. Like you can regulate it and you can make it socially unacceptable. Just the same way there's a lot of things that like free speech regulates things, but it doesn't make a lot of things like illegal. But we socially make a lot of things unacceptable to do that would be like legal to do. So that's I think you can socially kind of construct certain kind of boundaries to AI as well.
Hayden, did you have anything to add as well? Or?
Hayden sure does, but
I always
anyway.
do. I'm I'll save it in one sentence. I'm not super enthralled on the future of the entertainment industry, but that's just because I'm a huge hater and no other reason. I'll leave it at that.
Do you work in entertainment?
I did for a hot second. Yeah, currently no, but that's not not by my own hand. That's by the hands of capitalism. I need to make money.
So now you're working in a like you don't have to say where, but like what field are you working in now that
I will absolutely say where. I'm a photographer for Boston University. I shoot yearbook photos. I take photos and they get put in yearbooks and people buy them.
Okay. Well, that's still kind of in a way like it's still creative. So yeah. Okay.
Never said it wasn't creative. It's just not
entertainment.
the entertainment.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for like taking your time to even get to this point of the video. So like we're at the end of the YouTube video and we're like, if you got to this end, thank you. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate the input and the conversation and the time spent. So I appreciate you guys for joining and tuning in. And I hope that it was helpful for you and educational and that the PowerPoint was had a positive impact on your knowledge of podcasting. And I hope I wasn't rambling because I can do that. So thank you.
And thank you, Gloria, because we don't have a lot of people who come to talk about audio and audio storytelling. So
really,
that's a light.
Thank you so much. I'm glad yeah, audio and me in the same sentence. I'm like, who knew? Anyway, so yeah, thank you guys.